Well, now let's get along to the special segments that we have for tonight. The first one is MoTrack's Build Along, where we're having 4 modelers build the same model in 4 different scales: N scale, HO, S, and O scale. One of the modelers in Canada, Clark Cooney, hasn't received his model yet. It's in the Canadian postal system on its way to him, but he hasn't received it yet. Everybody else has received their model. Phil Edholm, unfortunately, couldn't be with us tonight. So we only have 2 of the modelers of the 4 that are going to be able to start the build along with you tonight. And that's Greg Cassidy and Bob Farquhar. Bob is building the S scale version, and Greg is building the HO version. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you and Bob.
All right, thank you, Jim. Let me bring up my part of the presentation. So what we're doing here is something we've never tried before, and that's building a build along with the same kit in 4 different scales. And last week, we were able to show you what arrived in the packages, except for Clark's. We think a moose ran off with it. And there were differences in the different scales, as you would expect, but it's interesting to see what the differences are. Some of them are the wood that's used, some of them are the way things are cut. So what I'm going to do tonight is show you my first 2 steps of the HO build, and then Bob will come along behind me and show his first 2 parts of the S scale build. And by next week, Phil will be able to be on, and Clark will have his kit, and they'll be able to show you how they did theirs. So for part 1, we're going to be showing preparing the wood pieces, including texturing, staining, and painting. For my HO scale, as usual, I would start out with cutting my bracing. After measuring it, I'll use my Ultimation cutter and cut it to length. One of the things that I noticed in the HO scale kit of this is the walls are nice and thick. And since it's not clapboard, there's going to be very little warping. So I didn't need to do a lot of bracing on it because I was going to be applying a light paint. If you were going to be doing heavy staining or something, you might want to put a little more bracing on. I went ahead and glued on my bracing, as you can see in the lower photograph. And then after I took that picture, I put a small piece of bracing over the 2 doorways just to strengthen them.
Greg, excuse me, is that
Yes.
when you brace, is it vertical or horizontal?
Well, it depends on the wood you're bracing, Jim. If I'm doing something like clapboard, it'll be vertical. If you're doing something like board and batten, I'll brace it horizontal. Once you've worked with wood some, you kind of get a feel for which way it's going to start bending once you get it wet. And it depends on the grain and the cut of the wood. If you're unsure, sometimes you can brace it in both directions, or if you have a part of the sheet that it came out of, you can go ahead and get that wet and see which way it tends to turn. But it's usually bracing against the grain and against the cut of the wood, which is usually going with the grain.
Thank you.
And one of the little tricks I like to do is put a bevel on the top edge of my walls if I have a gable type roof. And the reason I do that is so that then when the roof is put on, it'll sit flat on that wall, and it gives me a better gluing edge, and it gives me a chance to use my Ultimation sander. Now I was getting ready to paint my walls. I was going to be using a light cream and a dark brown. So I got all my pieces that I was going to paint in the light cream together first, and I painted them with my airbrush. And in the lower photos, that's them already painted. They don't look very different than the wooden color, but when you see it in real life, you can tell they're painted. Then since my building was going to be in pretty well kept shape, I didn't do a lot of weathering or peeling paint on it, but I did use a little wire scratcher that I have to put some wood grain in it.
Greg, can I ask you another question?
Sure can.
When you talk about painting, Is
Mhm.
this both sides or one side? How do you, what are you painting?
When I'm painting this kit, I painted the outside only. I was not going to be detailing the inside. And I had enough bracing that I didn't have to worry about painting the inside. Sometimes with paint or stains, if they're going to introduce a lot of water into the wood, you can paint both sides and that can help minimize the warping. Or if you're going to detail the interior, you'll be painting the inside walls anyway. But in this case, I was just painting the outside walls.
Thank you.
Then I took my burnt umber paint and again, using the airbrush, I just sprayed my windows and doors. I'll spray them usually on the sprue. And then once I cut them off, I'll use a brush to touch up where they've been cut off, just as Ted was showing earlier. And for my building, I was going to have a brown lower band going all the way around it. So instead of measuring all the walls plus all the strip wood for the corners and trying to get that even, I just assembled the building and then put tape around it and sprayed my lower part of the building with my airbrush and the dark brown paint all at one time so that they all matched up. So at that point, I have the windows, doors, and walls painted. The next thing that we're doing is moving on to the platform that this is going to sit on. The first thing I did for my platform was put some wood grain in it. And I used a card file. You can also use a saw or a wire brush. After I use a card file, I'll take an eraser over it, and that takes off all of the little fuzzies. And then you can see that the wood grain is in there. And being that this is going to be stained, the wood grain will show up real well. Now, for working with the platform that's going to support the deck, I decided that I wanted to brace this. In HO scale, the platform walls are fairly thin. And I knew I was going to be putting a lot of heavy stain on it. So I wanted to make sure that they were well braced. So I just cut some strip wood that I had laying around. And after I glued the corners together and put my corner posts in, I put the strip wood in all the way around the inside, and that'll keep any warping from happening. Then after I did that, and before I stained it, I glued the platform to the decking itself, and then I put weights on it to let it sit. This way it was going to make a nice, strong, monolithic structure that doesn't have any chance of warping. Now, once I went ahead and started staining it, I used 3 different colors. One of the things I have is a piece of strip wood with each color stain on it. I made those whenever I get a new bottle of stain. And that way I can just pull out all of my strip wood and decide what colors I want to use. I have the color marked on them. And I wanted to use a variety of shades so that I got a different wear pattern in the top. And you can see in the upper photo now, that's how it came out looking once it was stained. And then since the corners had little alignment tabs on them, one of the things we decided we wanted to do was show a way to hide them. I just took some scale 1x8 HO strip wood that I had. I stained it first and then cut it on my slicer and then just glued it over the corners of the posts, and that does a perfect job of hiding them, and it looks perfectly natural. So that's what I did with the HO scale one. I'm going to step off now and let Bob show you what he did on his S scale.
Okay. Come on here. There we go. So this is the S scale version of this kit. There's some tools you need, just the regular tools. I'm not going to talk about that. We talked about that in the past. There's the kit itself. This is the platform we're going to be building this one tonight, and a lot of strip wood. And the strip wood is nice, nicely colored here on the end, which is really nice. And this one particular one, I'm missing the canopy roof supports and the gable end. And the only reason I say that is that does happen sometimes, and you have to make do. I made my own because the instructions came with a template, how they would like what they look like and the shaping of them. So I use that to make my own pieces. So again, like Greg, I can use a razor saw for putting the grain in the wood. This one doesn't have it yet, but that's a good thick piece. So that razor saw or card file be good for that. The thinner pieces like this one here, I used a steel bristle brush on there. And so you may want to, depending on how much you wear you want to have on the platform, you can actually use a knife and cut these little slots in here a bit bigger. Then put a single edge razor blade on the edge here and bend up the pieces to make them look warping or splitting and tearing apart. But I was doing mine as being used, but not abandoned type of thing. So the other thing I did is on the this on the edge here, I cut use my X-Acto blade and just cut a slot in through all down here and like here and here and here. So when you're looking at it from the side, it'll be noticeable. Now, the nice job here, laser cutting. There's little tabs in here that the coding here. You can see, for example, this particular piece, there's there and here. And there's one here and one here. So it takes nothing for a knife to slip them through there. You got your pieces out. So this is really nicely done. So when you laser cut anything, their edges get burnt. All these edges are burnt. I don't worry about the top and bottom because the tops are going to be covered by this platform here, and the bottom, of course, on their the diorama or what you're going to be doing. But this edge here, I just put them on the sandpaper and take the burnt edge away, and so it's easier to stain or improves the stain of the paint you're putting on. There's talking about the strip wood coloring there, and what I've done in mine, I use a 100 line driftwood. You can also use alcohol in ink or, whatever you want to do there. But I wanted this color on mine. And all these walls I'm going to be doing, that's another step we're doing next week. And I wanted this coloring in the background because I'm going to be scraping away some of the paint. But this is not going to be used here for the platform. And then I put it between two pieces of wax paper. Now, unlike Greg and a lot of other people, they put the bracing on first, and I don't put my bracing on until later. So all these are done without bracing. So I use alcohol in the ink on both sides, and then I go as fast as I can and put between piece of wax paper here and puts lots of weight on there. So after a day, these things didn't move at all. They were fine. Then I added my bracing later on. So this particular kit, I assume it's going to be a freight depot because it's pretty tall. I want to do mine as a passenger depot. So I cut this section off here in the bottom, every one of them. So what I did, I cut one first, and then I use that to measure all the other ones, make sure I got them on the same height. And there's a disassemble here. And it's like Greg as well. I use a thin piece of wood here on each corner and to hide those joining parts in there. So that's the effect I wanted anyway, and that's what I got. So thanks. That's it for me. Any questions? Good.
Jim, and before we go, Jeff Adam, who owns MoTrack Models, is also here, and he'd like to say something as well.
That would be great. But Jeff, before you do, let me ask one question here.
Okay.
The one thing, hearing both of you all talk about how you built the model, Bob talked about the burnt end. Greg, did you not find the burnt end, or did you have another way of dealing with it, or it's just not important in HO?
Well, I was going to be staining my deck real dark, and so it really wasn't going to show up. If I was using a lighter stain like Bob, then I would sand the end, but I got to admit, every now and then I forget. And then once I've stained it and the end is coming out darker, I go, oh, I forgot. But it is, he's right. It does leave a burn mark everywhere it cuts. And if it's going to be shown and it's not going to be covered, then it is a good idea to sand it back down to the base wood.
in almost in any scale that you're dealing with.
Anything that's laser cut, yes.